Muhammad Omar, Emir of Afghanistan.
Muhammad Omar, also called Mullah Omar, born circa 1950-62, near Kandahar, Afghanistan, died April 2013, Pakistan, Afghan militant and leader of the Taliban, Pashto, Taliban, students, who was the Emir of Afghanistan, 1996-2001. Mullah Omar's refusal to extradite al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden prompted the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan in 2001 that overthrew the Taliban government there. Biographical details about Mullah Omar are sparse and conflicting. He was an ethnic Pashtun of the Ghilzai branch who, reportedly, was born near Kandahar, Afghanistan. He is thought to have had minimal schooling, aside from his religious education at a madrasa, School of Islamic Sciences, which was interrupted by the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. He fought with the Mujahideen against the Soviets during the Afghan War, 1978-92, and during that time he suffered the loss of his right eye in an explosion. After the Soviet withdrawal, Mullah Omar taught at a small village madrasa in the province of Kandahar. The end of the war did not bring calm, however, and political and ethnic violence escalated thereafter. Claiming to have had a vision instructing him to restore peace, Mullah Omar led a group of madrasa students in the takeover of cities throughout the mid-1990s, including Kandahar, Herat, Kabul, and Mazar-e-Sharif. In 1996 SHURA Council recognized Mullah Omar as Emir al-Mu'minin, Commander of the Faithful, a deeply significant title in the Muslim world that had been in disuse since the abolition of the Caliphate in 1924. That designation also made him Emir of Afghanistan, which from October 1997 until the fall of the Taliban was known as the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Mullah Omar marked the occasion by removing what was held to be the cloak of the Prophet Muhammad from the mosque in Kandahar where it was housed and donning the relic, effectively symbolizing himself as Muhammad's successor. The swift takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban under Mullah Omar is believed to have been funded at least in part by bin Laden, who had moved his base to Afghanistan after his expulsion from Sudan in the mid-1990s. Plus, under Mullah Omar's leadership, Pashtun social codes, Pashtunwali, were paramount, and strict Islamic principles were enforced. Education and employment for women all but ceased, capital punishment was enacted for transgressions such as adultery and conversion away from Islam, and music, television, and other forms of popular entertainment were prohibited. Among his most infamous decisions was an order to demolish the colossal Buddha statues at Bamiyan, culturally significant relics of Afghanistan's pre-Islamic history. To the outspoken regret of the international community, they were destroyed in March 2001. In the wake of al-Qaeda's September 11 attacks on New York City and Washington, D.C., Mullah Omar's refusal to extradite bin Laden prompted the United States to launch a series of military operations in Afghanistan. The Taliban government was overthrown, and Mullah Omar fled. His location was undetermined. Mullah Omar was long notoriously reclusive. Meetings with non-Muslims or with Westerners were almost never granted, and it was unclear whether any of the photographs that purportedly depict him were authentic, circumstances that made the pursuit of him even more difficult. At the end of the first decade of the 21st century, it was believed that Mullah Omar continued to direct Taliban operations from the sanctuary of Pakistan, although the Taliban denied that supposition. On July 29, 2015, the Afghan government announced that its intelligence service had learned that Mullah Omar had died in April 2013 in Pakistan. The report of Mullah Omar's death was confirmed by a Taliban representative the next day. His role as leader of the Taliban passed to Mullah Akhtar Mansour, who was killed the following year, and subsequently to Hibatullah Akhundzada.
Afghan War, 1978 to 1992. Afghan War. In the history of Afghanistan, the internal conflict that began in 1978 between anti-communist Islamic guerrillas and the Afghan Communist government, aided in 1979-89 by Soviet troops, leading to the overthrow of the government in 1992. But apart from the Afghanistan War, 2001-14, a U.S.-led invasion launched in response to the September 11 attacks on the United States in 2001. By this broader definition, many analysts consider the internal Afghan war as lasting well into the 21st century and overlapping with the U.S.-led Afghanistan War. Insurgency against communist rule, 1978-92.
The roots of the war lay in the overthrow of the centrist government of President Muhammad Aoud Khan in April 1978 by left-wing military officers led by Nur Muhammad Taraki. Power was thereafter shared by two Marxist-Leninist political groups, the People's Halk Party and the Banner Parcham Party, which had earlier emerged from a single organization, the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, and had reunited in an uneasy coalition shortly before the coup. The new government, which had little popular support, forged close ties with the Soviet Union, launched ruthless purges of all domestic opposition, and began extensive land and social reforms that were bitterly resented by the devoutly Muslim and largely anti-communist population. Insurgencies arose against the government among both tribal and urban groups, and all of these, known collectively as the Mujahideen, Arabic, Mujahideen, those who engage in jihad were Islamic in orientation. These uprisings, along with internal fighting and coups within the government between the People's and Banner factions, prompted the Soviets to invade the country in December 1979, sending in some 30,000 troops and toppling the short-lived presidency of People's leader Hafizullah Amin. The aim of the Soviet operation was to prop up their new but faltering client state, now headed by Banner leader Babrak Karmal, but the Mujahideen rebellion grew in response, spreading to all parts of the country. The Soviets initially left the suppression of the rebellion to the Afghan army, but the latter was beset by mass desertions and remained largely ineffective throughout the war.
The Afghan war quickly settled down into a stalemate, with about 100,000 Soviet troops controlling the cities, larger towns, and major garrisons, and the Mujahideen moving with relative freedom throughout the countryside. Soviet troops tried to crush the insurgency by various tactics, but the guerrillas generally eluded their attacks. The Soviets then attempted to eliminate the Mujahideen's civilian support by bombing and depopulating the rural areas. These tactics sparked a massive flight from the countryside. By 1982, some 2.8 million Afghans had sought asylum in Pakistan, and another 1.5 million had fled to Iran. The Mujahideen were eventually able to neutralize Soviet air power through the use of shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles supplied by the Soviet Union's Cold War adversary, the United States.
The Mujahideen were fragmented politically into a handful of independent groups, and their military efforts remained uncoordinated throughout the war. The quality of their arms and combat organization gradually improved, however, owing to experience and to the large quantity of arms and other war materiel shipped to the rebels, via Pakistan, by the United States and other countries, and by sympathetic Muslims from throughout the world. In addition, an indeterminate number of Muslim volunteers, popularly termed Afghan Arabs, regardless of their ethnicity, traveled from all parts of the world to join the opposition.
The war in Afghanistan became a quagmire for what by the late 1980s was the disintegrating Soviet Union. The Soviets suffered some 15,000 dead and many more injured. In 1988, the United States, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the Soviet Union signed an agreement by which the latter would withdraw its troops, completed in 1989, and Afghanistan returned to non-aligned status. In April 1992, various rebel groups, together with newly rebellious government troops, stormed the besieged capital of Kabul and overthrew the communist president, Najibullah, who had succeeded Karmal in 1986.
Conflict after 1992, a transitional government, sponsored by various rebel factions, proclaimed an Islamic Republic, but jubilation was short-lived. President Burhanuddin Rabbani, leader of the Islamic Society, Jamaat-e-Islami, a major Mujahideen group, refused to leave office in accordance with the power-sharing arrangement reached by the new government. Other Mujahideen groups, particularly the Islamic Party, Hezb-e-Islami, led by Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, surrounded Kabul and began to barrage the city with artillery and rockets. These attacks continued intermittently over the next several years as the countryside outside Kabul slipped into chaos. Partly as a response, the Taliban, Pashto, students, a puritanical Islamic group led by a former Mujahideen commander, Muhammad Omar, emerged in the fall of 1994 and systematically seized control of the country, occupying Kabul in 1996. The Taliban, augmented by volunteers from various Islamic extremist groups sheltering in Afghanistan, many of whom were Afghan Arab holdovers from the earlier conflict, soon controlled all but a small portion of northern Afghanistan, which was held by a loose coalition of Mujahideen forces known as the Northern Alliance. Fighting continued at a stalemate until 2001, When the Taliban refused demands by the U.S. government to extradite Saudi Arabian exile Osama bin Laden, the leader of an Islamic extremist group, al-Qaeda, which had close ties with the Taliban and was accused of having launched terrorist attacks against the United States, including the group of devastating strikes on September 11. Subsequently, U.S. Special Operations Forces, allied with Northern Alliance fighters, launched a series of military operations in Afghanistan that drove the Taliban from power by early December. See Afghanistan War. After a period of transitional interim government, a republic was established in 2004, but the new government struggled well into the 21st century to secure centralized authority over the country against a powerful Taliban insurgency. Casualties and repercussions. Afghanistan has never conducted a full census, and it is thus difficult to gauge the number of casualties suffered in the country since the outbreak of fighting. The best estimates available indicate that some 1.5 million Afghanis were killed before 1992, although the number killed during combat and the number killed as an indirect result of the conflict remain unclear. The casualty rate after 1992 is even less precise. Many thousands were killed as a direct result of factional fighting, hundreds or thousands of prisoners and civilians were executed by tribal, ethnic, or religious rivals, and a large number of combatants, and some non-combatants, were killed during the U.S. offensive. Moreover, tens of thousands died of starvation or of a variety of diseases, many of which in less troubled times could have been easily treated, and hundreds of thousands were killed or injured by the numerous landmines in the country. Afghanistan was, by the end of the 20th century, one of the most heavily mined countries in the world, and vast quantities of unexploded ordnance litter the countryside. The number of Afghan refugees living abroad fluctuated over the years with the fighting and reached a peak of some 6 million people in the late 1980s.